In this video, you will follow a brave adventurer on their quest to survive 100 days in the treacherous world of Valheim. From building bases and forging powerful weapons to exploring the vast and varied landscapes and facing off against fearsome creatures, you won't want to miss it. It's me, by the way, the brave warrior. It's me. Okay, please subscribe. 10k soon. Very cool. I was dropped from the sky on day 1, talked to a crow, then got straight to work running around aimlessly, trying to understand how the game worked. But before I could do much, I was attacked by a small, annoying gremlin, ran away and hid, and finally managed to escape. After I'd found out that you can punch trees, another greyling came after me, then started to flee, so I ran after it, eventually ending in my demise. Deciding to start over, I was instantly harassed by more monsters, but after crafting up a bat, they stood no chance against the pure hunk of muscle known as Dave. I eventually crafted an axe, crushed myself with a tree, chopped it into tiny pieces in revenge, and noticed that night was falling. Luckily, I found a small shack that I could stay in.
Never mind.
I did it anyway. My plan for day 2 was to complete a slightly larger home for me to stay in. So I grabbed a bunch of stones, crafted a hammer, saw a tree knock over another tree, then got started on my home. I flattened some ground, then demolished my entire shack and began my new home's foundations. Soon I had to repair my axe, so I returned to my crafting bench before realizing that I needed a roof to craft, for some reason. I made some walls and created a small overhang using the bench, and finally could repair my tools. I then crafted a cooking thing, but couldn't get a fire as it was too dark to get stones, so I cowered in fear next to my crafting bench until the morning. I crafted some new tools and chopped a bunch of trees when the sun rose, and decided to complete my new home by nightfall. I revamped the style I was going for, building up a bunch of necessities like a bed and a campfire. Eventually, I completed my small haul, chopped one more tree to build a storage chest, and finished off the day by placing a cooking stand over my campfire and cooking meat in the comfort of my home. Waking up on day 4, I decided to promptly climb on my roof and build a chimney, because, you know, it looks cool. I then saw that I could make clothes out of leather, so I headed out to harvest the corpses of my enemies. I got a bunch of leather and even a deer trophy, and was looking for more deer when I came across a strange structure with a beehive inside. I tried to grab it, but whenever I got close, I would get poisoned. And it was becoming night as well, so I just marked it on my map and headed home. There, I made myself leather hat and pants, which I wore. I set my sights on the crude bow on day 5, as I wanted to start preparing for the first boss. After finding a fish just sitting there, I managed to kill a bunch of boar and deer, and after chopping a tree, I crafted up my bow. I tested it on my wall, then spent the night cooking up some food and organizing my things. My final step for preparation was full leather armor, so once again I spent the day hunting deer. I eventually came across an area named the Black Forest where I was wont to turn around, and yet I continued forward, but I would come to regret that decision. In fact, I would regret it immediately as I walked into a stone tower and got myself stuck. After bashing down 2 wood pillars, I freed myself and was beginning my hunt again when a huge storm broke. I decided to make the small run home from the small shack I was sheltering in, and eventually got there. I spent the rest of the night crafting my new leather armor and filling my home with toxic fumes. I spent the morning of day 7 cooking up a bunch of food, as today was the day I would take on the first boss. After I was happy with my preparations, I headed over. When I arrived, I realized I needed my deer trophies to sacrifice, so I headed home, grabbed them, ran back, and finally spawned in the boss. The weather turned dark and stormy, and a massive lightning deer appeared.
He's right behind me. I think I'm gonna try and get some melees in. I shouldn't have done that. Oh, I hit him. Yes! He's down! I'm teabagging in AI right now.
It was a long and terrifying fight, but eventually I came out the victor, taking his trophy and placing it upon the stone, granting me the power of I could run for a longer time now. Relieved about how well the fight went, I headed to sleep. I finally crafted a pickaxe on day 9 using the antlers from the boss. Heading outside, I met the crow again, who told me that there were ores in the Black Forest that I could collect using my new pickaxe, so I spent the morning running around looking for the place. I eventually arrived and found some copper which I dug out from the earth. The crow told me that I could smelt them, but to do that I would need to get resources from under the ground. And a bit confused about what this meant, I spent the entire rest of the day running from a horde of grey dwarfs I found at a nest. I decided on day 9 to head back to the Black Forest in search of some sort of cave. I was instantly harassed by 2 skeletons who dealt half my health bar in 2 shots and had a shield. I was finally able to kill them with the help of a boar and was exploring again when I found a stone tower. Climbing up, I found an infestation of skeletons and had to promptly evacuate the area. Unfortunately, while I was collecting copper, one of them decided to chase me, and seeing as they did a stupid amount of damage and my knife did nothing, I was forced to run. But of course, I returned the next day, determined to find a cave. While unfortunately I didn't, I did end up finding some tin in the river, as well as a gigantic troll who threw literal boulders at me. I managed to escape, but as night fell, I decided it was a good idea to set up a new home in the Black Forest, so I wouldn't have to run all the way home every time. Construction on my new home continued well into day 11, but eventually between being attacked for no reason and spawn camped in my home with 2 HP, I managed to complete it. And just 10 seconds away, I finally found the cave that I was looking for. I excitedly headed inside, curious of what was inside. There were skeletons. Lots of skeletons. Skeletons that in fact did half my HP bar, and I did 1/15 of theirs. And although I did find a ruby in a chest, I was eventually killed. I grabbed my things and escaped because there was no chance of me fighting them off. I was then trying to sleep, but there were monsters nearby, but surely they were just little greylings that I could take care of, right? This is one of the games of all time. I began day 12 by trying to light a fire, which just wouldn't start. It wasn't raining, there was plenty of air, it just wouldn't go. So I gave up and returned to the cave, this time determined to show the skeletons who was boss. I managed to kill 2 of them and was exploring a room where I finally found the circling core which I needed to build the forge, which was the whole reason I was down here in the first place. I sprinted all the way home, opened the workbench, and realized I needed 5 of them. Still flabbergasted about the fact I needed 5 of them, I did some research and found out that I could get them by killing Surtlings, who lived in the Ashlands and the swamp. I had never heard of either of these places, and I'm a complete brainlet, so I spent the entire day looking around the island for these biomes. I came across a couple of dangers, but nothing compared to the onslaught at nightfall. At any given moment, there were at least 6 monsters after me, and every 5 seconds I would run out of stamina. Like these things that try to kill you, and you're having a breather. I was trekking home the next day when I found a new biome, the mountain. I excitedly climbed, started freezing, and promptly left. When I eventually arrived home, I put away my things and crafted a deer rug before deciding that I had enough of this island and I wanted to go to the one in the distance. So I crafted a raft and set sail the next morning. I sailed all the way to the next island, parked my ship, and set out to explore. I found a mountain and some dark forest, so I decided to set up a little home. Unfortunately, I ran out of wood mid-construction, and as night had fallen, so many monsters were after me. It got so horrendous that I literally had to block myself into the small cabin I had, walked into my own campfire, and burnt to death. Spawning back at my home on day 16, I got straight to work chopping a tree, then headed out to kill some boars, as I needed hide to create a raft. It took all day, but I eventually scraped together the needed resources and sailed off. I eventually got to my shack and was happily, safely building up my roof. I meant to say shack, okay, I swear. When Magic Man from Adventure Time decided it was a good idea to shoot me through a solid wood wall, while the game refused to place a block in the only plausible place it would go. So once again, on day 17, I chopped some trees, grabbed a bunch of leather from boars, and placed down a brand new ship. But not wanting the same thing to happen again, I decided to prepare. First, I cooked some food, tried to grab it, but instead went to sleep. So it's day 18 now. The first thing I did was chop a whole bunch of trees so I'd have plenty of wood to finish my shack when I sailed over, set my spawn, and completed the roof. After adding a chimney, I also added some safety around my campfire so I wouldn't die again. And finally, I could rest and be peaceful on the new island. I chopped a tree the following morning, then decided it was time to search for some new biomes, so I popped my ability and headed off. I ran along the bank, found a beehive, ended up at the dark forest, and decided to turn around. On my way home, I was walking peacefully when I turned around to see a troll. I sprinted away and hid in a shack for a while, then returned to my home. Was getting ready to head to sleep when I saw the hand of a troll clipping through my walls. I eventually managed to get some sleep. I woke up the next morning happy that the troll was gone. It was not. After it broke literally half of my home, I escaped and led it to an open area where I used my bow to slowly whittle its health and eventually defeated it. Returning to my home, I repaired it fully, then crafted some new armor using my troll hide. I then tried to leave the island, but unfortunately there was no wind, so my boat didn't move. I spent the rest of the day being annoyed by little gremlins. It was luckily windy on day 21, so I ran up to my boat and set off. I decided that I might as well just get the cores I needed from crypts, so I headed off in my boat to find some. Unfortunately, the wind wasn't blowing in the right direction, so I pushed my boat to shore, returned to my home, and prepared for the rest of the day. And so, fully prepared on day 22, I headed off to the dark forest in search of tombs. My plan for today was to basically get on the edge of the forest, possibly find a crypt, and build a small shelter for me to sleep and respawn. So, with the safety of a respawn very close by, I headed to a crypt that I had found. Walking inside, I killed a bunch of skeletons, but got jump scared when a 1-star skeleton appeared, basically a much stronger version, and did half my HP. So I escaped, decided that my game plan would be to enter the crypt, run past the skeletons, close the door behind me, and slowly kill them off. Unfortunately, there were no doors. I spent the rest of the day recuperating myself and being killed instantly. I began day 24 hunting for boars, as I wanted a shield entering the tomb again. I needed just 2 more, but I went home to do some cooking when I looked up and a troll was running straight at me. Just my luck that it was the one time I didn't have a bow. I had to run away for a stupidly long time, but eventually it got bored, so I could go home, craft my shield, and create a game plan. I headed off again on day 25 as my game plan began with obtaining some proper armor. I first killed some boars, returned, crafted a bow, and caught the attention of a troll. I slowly whittled its HP and finally he went down, rewarding me with some troll hide. Unfortunately, I needed an upgraded workbench to craft armor, which needed flint. I wandered down to the beach the next morning picking up flint. I eventually got enough, but as I was returning, a huge storm broke, so I quickly chopped a tree and sheltered in my home, where I crafted my new armor. I then decided I needed a spear, so I headed back out to gather flint and ended the night by crafting one up. After hunting a couple more deer the next day and crafting up another piece of armor, I set out into the crypt. I first placed a campfire so I would be able to see and hold a shield before entering. I was ganged up on pretty fast, so I escaped, but conveniently there was another skeleton who had just decided to spawn right there, hitting me as soon as I exited. I then held up my shield, which prompted it to do more damage than when I didn't have it up. And on top of this, when I returned to the tomb, a 2-star rancid remains decided to spawn. What is that thing?
How much damage do I do? Okay, these guys need to get out of the way. They're really annoying. Oh, my bow's gonna break there. Okay, wait, I'm gonna be back. I need to get more I need to get more arrows.
I returned the next day with more arrows and managed to kill all of the skeletons. I then went out to chop some trees as I had a new plan. I would use campfires to block skeletons from getting to me, and using this I would be able to collect more cores and my things. I went the other way, had some close calls, and decided to call it a day. But I completed the crypt the next day, breaking the spawner and collecting all of my well-earned loot.
Wait, this is so hype. I'm so happy, man. I'm returning home now. Hello there. Woo, let's go.
I spent the rest of the day smelting up my copper. I began day 30 by cooking up 6 pieces of boar meat and letting them burn into 6 pieces of coal, which I put into my smelter. I then decided that food waste is bad, so I spent the entire day heading all the way to the crypt that I hadn't yet completed, killing the skeletons, grabbing the cores, and returning home. The next morning, I placed down a charcoal kiln using my cores, which would turn wood into coal. I used this to smelt up a bunch of tin, then wanting some new items, decided to head back to the dark forest to get some core wood. Eventually, I found some pine trees, and while dancing around a grey dwarf brute, I grabbed some and ran home. I needed both copper and core wood on day 32, so I took my ship and decided to see if I could get any resources on the other island. Unfortunately, upon arrival, I realized that the dark forest there was 3 feet in diameter and had nothing of use. So I sailed back in the raging winds and hiked all the way to the dark forest there, arrived, and was instantly attacked by a skeleton who decided to do just a little bit of damage. Realizing that I couldn't heal in the storm, I headed to my nearby home, and after the game did a little bit of trolling, I was able to head to bed. Now the storm was gone, I could safely head into the forest and chop some pine trees. Unfortunately, a 1-star grey dwarf brute decided to spawn, so I bowed it to death and returned, and amazingly, nothing else spawned. I filled my inventory with core wood and ran home, deposited them, and once again made the trek back to the dark forest and into my cabin. I spent the next 2 days chopping copper, and when I had enough to fill my inventory, I made the multiple treks home and started smelting. I continued to smelt all through the morning of day 36, and before long I had enough copper to create some bronze, which I could then use to craft a whole bunch of new things. I decided to start by crafting a cultivator and cultivating a plot of land where I planted a bunch of carrots. I finished the day by building a small fence, but it didn't look great, so I'd probably replace it later, which I decided to do, but after tearing it down, I decided instead to improve my home by building a small ledge all around the roof. I chopped a couple of trees to both get wood and get them out of the way, and eventually got all the way around. With this done, I started with a fence around my carrots, but it got too dark to see, so I finished it off in the morning. Now that I just had to wait until my carrots were done, I decided to head back to the dark forest to get some more copper. I found a whole bunch, but it was right next to a grey dwarf nest, so I spent some time slowly hacking away at it until it broke. I killed all of the dwarf strugglers, then broke copper until I couldn't hold any more, then headed to my shack. Making the long trek home the next day, I filled up my smelters and harvested some carrots. I replanted them to give me more carrot seeds before crafting up some bronze bars and deciding once again to head to the dark forest to find some copper and tin. Storing it all in a chest, I decided to stay for day 40 as well, gathering a large amount of both resources. I spent the next 2 days hiking from my dark forest home to my base, carrying large amounts of ores. Along the way, I planted a bunch of carrot seeds and chopped 2 trees to fuel my charcoal kiln. I began day 43 fixing my door, then spending some time smelting up some copper and tin. I teched on my carrots, then using my new bars, I crafted both a bronze sword and a bronze axe. Excited to test it out, I chopped a bunch of trees to fuel my kiln, before realizing that I could now chop birch trees, which I couldn't before. And upon grabbing my first fine wood, I was greeted by a huge amount of new things that I could craft, so I harvested this wood for the rest of the day. And on day 44, the preparations for the next boss began. First, I wanted a fine bow, so I built a table and a chair so I could sit and contemplate how I would achieve that. Seeing as I needed 2 deer hide, I headed out with my copper sword to gather some, which I used with the wood to create my bow. Next on the list was full bronze armor, and seeing as I needed to wait until my bars finished smelting, I decided to head back to the forest to get some more ore for the other equipment and future tools I would need. I got a bunch, then cleared a ton of skeletons on a castle, then for some reason decided to just jump off, killing me. Even worse, I had spawned all the way back at base, so the whole day was just walking back. But after grabbing some copper the next morning, I made my way home. When I arrived, I cooked up some food and watched as a greyling welcomed itself into my home. And after smelting up some final ores, I crafted out my full set of bronze armor. And sitting on my beach, I was incredibly ready to fight this boss. So I ran out of my home the next day just to find my ship had made its way into the middle of the lake. But this didn't stop me. I crafted up a new ship, hopped on and realized the wind was blowing the opposite direction of where I wanted to go. This was fine. Instead, I spent the day building a little pen and leading a boar into it, dropping in some carrots and hoping that it would tame itself overnight. It hadn't, so I hopped right on my ship and headed off to sea, in search of the next boss. I sailed for most of the day through a storm, but eventually found land, and with it the next boss arena. Unfortunately, I forgot the tribute item to sacrifice, so I just had to sail all the way back. Very productive. But I boated all the way back the next day. Actually, the wind completely stopped when I was halfway there, so I just had to swim and push my boat the rest of the way. Very nice. Nonetheless, I got to the arena eventually, sacrificed the seeds, and spawned the boss. The Elder had 2 attacks, one that he shoots vines at you, and one that spawns roots that attack you. I would be shooting him with my bow, but the screen shake makes it just a little bit hard. Eventually, I had to back up over a river where he just refused to follow me, so I just shot at him from a distance. Unfortunately, near morning, my bow broke. Quickly building up a workbench, repairing my bow, and crafting some arrows, I once again got shooting.
One more shot and he's dead. Let's go. The Elder is defeated. Swamp key. Hello? I want to go home.
Unfortunately, I couldn't leave the island as the wind was blowing the other direction. I was completely stranded here. Would name a single fun that comes out of this mechanic. 20 minutes later, I arrived home, and fed up, I went to bed. The next morning, I collected some carrot seeds, then headed over to the headstone where I placed my prize. It shone bright red, so I decided to see what the power did. And I have no idea what the power does. It said nowhere on the stone, so I guess I'll just never know. But I was still very curious about the other item I had gained, the swamp key. So I did what I had to do, hopped on my boat again, and got searching. I spent all of day 52 searching for a swamp. I was beginning to lose hope, but miraculously near the end of the day, a sea monster attacked, dealing 60 damage to my raft. I was forced to turn, but to no avail. My boat rapidly breaking and land still so far away, I was killed. At least I know where a swamp is now, right? Waking up on day 53, I was set back to square one. I spent the day getting resituated and thinking of a plan for me to get my things back. My somewhat genius plan was to use portals to have a safe and short journey between the swamp and my base. But there were 2 problems. I didn't have enough fine wood or enough bronze for a new axe, and I didn't have any circling cores. So with nothing else on the agenda, I began the harsh trek up to the forest. When I arrived, I chopped a whole bunch of copper, which I brought back to my house. But on day 55, it was time to get some circling cores. So I headed out into the forest, hoping that I would run into a crypt. Finding one of my homes, I dropped off my copper to lighten my inventory and headed back out, eventually finding a troll. This really didn't help, but then a skeleton attacked me, letting me find a nearby crypt and marking it on my map. I also found another strange crypt, but night was falling, so I set up in a nearby castle. Day 56 was the day of preparation. First, I repaired all of my weapons, then headed out to gather wood, as I wanted a stockpile of arrows just in case another 2-star skeleton appeared. But while I was crafting, my screen started to shake and a troll poked its head through my wall. Absolutely terrified, I headed up my castle and shot it from the rooftop. I ended the day chopping a rock so I would build up some campfires in my crypt. so I headed right in the next morning. I placed a fire, then got to work killing all of the skeletons. The campfire did help until I realized it was the only thing in the tomb actually killing me. I explored the area for a little, got jump scared by a bunch of skeletons, and stupidly threw my spear away. Escaping the crypt, I knew I needed to craft a new weapon, so I scoured the beachside for flint. For the entire day, there was none. Flint is a myth and is fake and doesn't exist. I was heading home defeated when I found another crypt, so I marked it on my map. Unfortunately, at this exact moment, I got a reminder on my calendar. This stupid thing refused to leave and didn't let me control my character, leading in his demise. Exiting my home the next morning, I headed to where I died, but I was very confused when I saw that my things weren't there. Little did I know, I'd gone to the wrong crypt, but I didn't know this, so instead I spent the entire day wandering around aimlessly trying to get some flint and wood. So after checking over my footage, I headed to the correct area on day 59, lured the skeletons away, grabbed my things, and made my escape. Now I had all of my things back, I built up some storage and crafted a bunch of arrows, then decided to head back outside to once again find some flint. But this time, it was to craft some flint arrows. And that's exactly what I did the next morning, crafting up some arrows, then heading over to the crypt. And for the entire day, I simply hit skeletons. Unfortunately, they literally spawned faster than I can kill them. Every time that I would have a break, I would run in and the room would be filled with skeletons who would all come after me. Very cool. But after some more planning, I decided to wing it and just see how far I could get ignoring the skeletons and just hitting the spawner. This surprisingly worked, managing to get a couple of hits in every time I would circle around. Even once snagging a core from beneath their bony noses. Long story short, I broke the spawners and now I had enough cores to create the portals. So with them in hand, I hiked back the next day. When I eventually arrived and I was putting away my things, I realized something. I had forgotten one of the cores. So I smelted some copper and checked on my boar's taming, which was at 25% by the way, and begrudgingly headed back to the forest. Arrived and grabbed the item that I had forgotten. I arrived back as the sun rose, smelted a bunch of copper, and finally crafted my bronze axe, which I used to chop some birch. Using all of my ingredients, I was finally able to place down the first portal, which I named Swamp. I spent the rest of the day chopping trees to have materials as soon as I arrived in the new area. With the items for my portal in hand, I finally set off on day 64, and between wind not going the right way and also wind not going the right way, I eventually made it to land on day 66. Seeing as my boat was gonna dock near an enemy spawner, I pulled up the sail, activated my ability, and ran. Eventually, I found the swamp with my things, but I needed a place to set up the portal. Soon enough, I came across an abandoned castle ruin, so I killed off the monsters, set up the portal, and made it safely home. I spent day 67 making my home livable. I began by chopping a whole lot of logs back at base, then taking the teleporter over. I demolished the previous structures, then built up a little door frame, continued with a roof, a stairway up to the roof, and ended with a little storage area. But after chopping more trees in the morning, I was back at the house finishing off the balcony area. With the main living place complete, I decided to make it safe by surrounding myself with tall wooden spiked posts. To be fair, I was right next to the swamp and God knows what lives in there. By nightfall, I placed the final piece, making my new swamp home perfectly safe. So I moved in on day 69, placing down my campfire and bed. When I went back to repair my tools, I realized that the boar I had kept had not tamed in the hours I had kept it and had broken a fence and escaped. Oh well. I was about to venture into the swamp when a storm broke, and knowing that having low health and stamina regen would be dangerous, I decided to stay and work on the house, and I wanted to go down. I spent the day digging an area under my home until my pickaxe broke. Unfortunately, I was stuck down there as I didn't have enough wood to create a staircase, but my genius proved itself when I broke another staircase and managed to escape. I chopped some trees the next morning, which I used to create a proper staircase to the basement of my home. I dug out a bunch more, then realizing that the storm was over, decided it was time to get my things. But I needed a boat to do that, so I headed through the portal to grab some leather. I didn't have enough, so I went hunting. None at all spawned. Where are the boars when you actually need them? I started day 71 hunting boars, eventually finding the amount I needed and finally heading to the swamp. Emptying my inventory other than my armor and my boat supplies, I headed in. There were so many new enemies that were genuinely horrifying, but what sucked was the serpent or whatever was still capping my things, literally swimming circles around it. What also sucked was the giant tree chasing me, but I did manage to escape with my life to think of a game plan. As I returned to the scene the next day, my game plan was very simple. Press sneak. My plan worked surprisingly well, and I managed to get through the entire swamp without alerting anything other than this leech. And I was wondering how I would get my things when a man with an axe suddenly started walking towards me and completely unintentionally found me, alerting the swamp of my existence. I hastily made my escape. As I was heading to the swamp the next day, I had a troll and 2 skeletons attack me, and I just wanted to share my genius in making them kill each other. Like, just saying. When I arrived, my plan was simple. Complete a recon mission and plan out what I would do. Monitoring the terrifying abomination, I made my way to the beach, got spotted by a skeleton, and escaped. But I had a plan. My plan began by getting the troll armor set bonus sneaky. So I went home, crafted a troll hat, and located the last piece I needed, the cape. This needing a whopping 10 troll hide, but luckily I knew the location of 2 trolls off the top of my head. Heading to the first one near the swamp, I used my dodge rolls to do nothing but look cool and grab my hide. The other was on the opposite side of my island, so I spent the day trekking over, contemplating getting another portal. I remembered correctly, as the next morning I spotted the troll through the trees. Getting its attention, then enduring the long and tedious fight, I grabbed my prize and headed off. I realized after that I had troll hide already in my chests. When I completed my trek home, I grabbed some bone and crafted up the cape, giving me the sneaky buff. I certainly was looking awfully sneaky. I completed my preparations on day 76 by grabbing my copper axe and hitting a bunch of birch trees. I used this fine wood to construct a fine bow, then went on to craft a bunch of copperhead arrows, the best I had so far. The next step was food, and I wanted 2 cooked meals and a yellow mushroom, as I needed both health and stamina. I took my food off the grill, and I was ready. Sprinting through the woods, I eventually made it back to the swamp. Sneaking in, I avoided 2 enemies, but when I arrived at the beach, my first problem arose. A skeleton and a draugr were blocking my path. I made swift work of them and also got rid of a blob, granted it did take my spear. And after all that, there was 1 enemy left. It was a 2-star draugr. This was not good. Luckily, I climbed up a branch that their AI just couldn't get up, and it just ran away. I was finally alone to craft my boat. I had forgotten resin. Holding a whole bunch of resin, I returned to my spot the next day. After taking care of a couple of enemies, I noticed the sea monster was gone and was considering taking a boat from where I was when my decision making was slightly influenced. I got to my grave but couldn't pick it up as there were 2 leeches and a massive walking tree after me. The tree drowned and I fought off the leeches before heading back. The wind was blowing the opposite direction. I decided to camp out on the other island for the night. I spent all of day 79 waiting for some good wind. It never came. But when I woke up on day 80 and noticed the wind was perfect, I knew today was the day. Lining myself for a quick grab and run, I noticed something. The abomination hadn't drowned and was camping my things. But I was confident in my plan. Sailing up and taking some shots, I grabbed all my things, leapt off my ship, activated my power, and sprinted away. I had finally secured my things. I spent the rest of the day in a crypt taking circling cores. But on day 81, I wanted to find the use for the swamp key, which I had gotten from the elder. So, presuming it had something to do with the swamp, I headed in. My bow absolutely trolling and my spear doing everything, I managed to survive until a slime attacked. I tried to hit it as it jumped, and I threw my spear into the ocean. I spent the rest of the day chopping copper, as I kind of wanted a new one. But I needed a smelter and kiln to get my spear, so I headed out and completed another crypt before placing them down and chopping some tin down in the riverbed. When I was returning, I came across another crypt, and with nothing stopping me, I looted it as well. It was really satisfying after being bullied by these skeletons earlier in the video. I spent the rest of the day smelting up copper. I realized that I needed a little more copper the next day, so after chopping some trees, I headed off. I was collecting some with my pickaxe when a troll came to attack me, and instead of killing it, I decided to make it collect the copper for me, which it did happily. And when I had enough, I disposed of it. I once again spent the rest of the day smelting up the bars. I began day 84 by crafting up a bronze atgear with my forge in my basement. I then noticed a strange bag on my map, which I hadn't explored yet, and running over, I noticed it was a trader of some sort. After looking through the wares, I left, grabbed all my valuable items, and returned to sell them. With all of my gold, I bought a headpiece that lit up the area, and spent the day testing it on a nearby crypt. I decided it was finally time to actually find the use for the swamp key on day 85. Slightly hindered by being killed by a troll, I searched the entire swamp but found nothing. By the end, I remembered about another swamp across the lake, so I chopped some trees for a raft, which the next day I headed to the beach and hopped on. I sailed to the other island, set my spawn at the bed, and entered the swamp. I was killed when I accidentally ran right into a bowman, got my things, and continued searching for anything that might use a key. A blob attacked me and I killed it relatively easily, but died like 10 seconds later from poison. When I was running over to collect my things, I got stuck on a root on the ground and was killed instantly by a troll I didn't even see. My next attempt was more successful though, and I managed to grab my things and continued on my way searching. I eventually made it to the end of the swamp without finding a single key needing structure, so I turned around, was returning home when I was literally one-tapped by an axe-wielding madman. I sprinted over and grabbed my things in the morning of day 88. After destroying a grey dwarf nest, I spent some time searching the shore perimeter of the swamp. I did this so I would never really enter the dangerous area, but I would still not miss anything inside. Unfortunately, after searching for the entire day, I still found nothing. So, knowing that both swamps near me were completely empty, I sailed back to my home. I planned to set off on foot, but wanting as much sunlight as possible, I decided to work on my basement the entire day. I dug out a bunch, and wanting to add support beams as decoration, I chopped some trees and added them in. Activating my power, I set off on a hike on day 90. Other than finding a bunch of monsters and a little loot, nothing of note really happened, except when I found a troll cave. Curious of what may be inside, I killed the troll outside, built a little home, and headed in. I was killed multiple times, sometimes right as I entered, and sometimes because my character needed a breather. As well as this, when I tried to spawn one time, I got stuck and was forced to punch my way out with my bare fists. This is certainly one of the games of all time. Dying a couple more times to the troll the next day, I eventually killed it and claimed my unimaginably disappointing reward. Heading further down in my quest for a swamp, I ended up finding one, so I chopped a bunch of logs, found another abandoned castle, and set up my home. I spent the entire day repairing the area and adding improvements. With my home complete, I headed into the swamp for day 92, searching for a structure. After dying once to a Draugr's abominable reach, I cooked up some meat for some extra health and dove back in. As I was sneaking around, I found a creepy structure as well as a solid box in the distance, and excited, I marked it on the map and returned home. On my way, I witnessed the Draugrs and the Grey Dwarfs really disliking each other. Probably some lore there, but I really don't care. Excitedly running over to the marked location on day 93, I arrived and saw it was a proper structure. I quickly fought off a Draugr, but was hit a single time by a blob, so I inevitably died a couple of seconds later. Running in and grabbing my things again, I fought off a bunch of monsters and was about to clear the area to make it safe when I got one-tapped by a Draugr behind me. Running back into the swamp, I quickly grabbed my things before finally entering the sunken crypt. I was a bit confused as there was no way to go, but I quickly started pickaxing the walls, revealing a tomb on the other side. But knowing that if I died, I would have a rough time getting my things, I decided to set up a camp outside. Chopping some trees, I accidentally annoyed a single Draugr, which I would have dealt with if another 3 hadn't decided to appear. Slightly annoyed, I ran back and grabbed my things, and was about to start construction on my wall when an oozer hit me once, dealing my entire health bar. I began day 95 by running around collecting stone and wood, then crafting up an axe, which I used to collect a bunch of wood. Then running into the swamp, I got my things and was planning to build a home, but every enemy in a 400-kilometer radius was after me, so I cut my losses and ran. As I headed back to my first base, I decided that I wasn't really good at these kind of games, so I would happily spend my last days building, as you know, that's just what I enjoyed. Walking up back at my base, I began by chopping wood. My basic plan for this build was going to be a massive watchtower with multiple stories and a staircase up the middle. I spent the next 2 days collecting all the wood that I could and storing it on a little island that I decided to build on. I had a look at my wood supply on day 98, and after building up a quick foundation, I went up. I found out something called the build limit height on day 99, so I made a little roof area on the top, adding a crafting bench and a storage chest, and called the build complete. And finally, it was day 100. I decided to end off the video by climbing to the top of my tower, dying, setting a bed, and finally reaching the highest point of my tower. I reflected on my time here and decided it was mostly positive. I strongly recommend the game. Anyways, please subscribe. 10k very soon. Lots of likes for part 2. I'll see you when I see you. Bye bye.